Fraud affects businesses of all sizes, whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 50 company or the owner of a sandwich shop. This video and this YouTube channel will help you prevent fraud from occurring, identify fraud earlier if it is occurring, and learning how to deal with fraud if you become a victim. I'm going to take complex financial information and situations and simplify them. What you're going to learn here, you're going to be able to use right away in your business. So let's go. Did you know that on average it takes 16 months to identify fraud if it's identified at all? What does this mean? That means that fraud lives in your organization for a long time. Did you know that if you identify fraud and it's occurring in your organization, by going to the police does not necessarily mean that they're going to help? Why not? Police are short on budgets. They're ill-equipped to deal with financial fraud investigation. And they prioritize physical crimes versus financial crimes. One way to get the police to really look at your case is to provide them something that we prepare, a court-ready forensic report. What does that do? It lays out the background. It lays out the documentation and supporting information that you have available. It tells the story and it shows the support that supports the story. It is a guidebook, a roadmap of sorts for the police. And what does that do? It simplifies their investigation process, and it makes it more appealing to look into your specific instance, your specific case. Before we know how to deal with fraud and how to identify it and prevent it, we need to see what the most common frauds occurring within organizations are today. There is payroll fraud, expense fraud, asset misappropriation, vendor collusion, kickbacks, and corruption. Okay, so there's a lot of frauds that are occurring out there. You have accountants. You may even have an accounting team or external auditors, and they come in and they do the work. And there's this misconception that if they do the work, that their job is, as part of their job, to identify and to eliminate fraud. But I gotta tell you something, that's not the case. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, auditors are responsible for identifying 4% or less of frauds occurring in an organization. Just think about that. 4 out of every 100 frauds that are occurring is identified by an external auditor. But who else, and who else's responsibility is it to identify frauds that are occurring? And how do we do it? According to the auditing standards, it is the board and management's responsibility to identify, detect, and prevent fraud from occurring. It is not the external auditor's responsibility. Many companies, however, rely on their external auditors for fraud prevention and detection. And this is being done incorrectly. So what should you be doing? Do you have fraud controls in place? Have you tested them? Do you know if they could be overridden? As an expert, I can help you establish a fraud policy, test your controls, identify areas of weakness that need to be addressed. I can also train your team in terms of what fraud looks like. That way, if fraud does occur, the best eyes and ears for your organization is your team. And worst comes to worst, if an investigation is required, my team and I can help you. So how do we take control back? What is it that your organization needs to do to help reduce the exposure to fraud? And if the organization becomes the victim of fraud, that it's identified early and that it's quarantined. What is it that you do? Well, here's my 5-step plan that should help. Step number 1, create a fraud policy. A fraud policy says, here's what we're going to accept, here's what we're not going to accept, and here's what happens or here are the procedures that should happen if we suspect fraud of occurring. Number 1, we're going to go speak to general counsel. Number 2, we're going to put that person on suspended leave with pay. Number 3, who's going to be in the circle of trust in terms of the investigation? Number 4, does the investigation need to be conducted independently, or is it okay for our key stakeholders if we do it inside, if our own team does it? A lot of the time, you do not become a hero if you do your own investigation, because if you don't find something, your key stakeholders are going to say, of course you didn't find anything. Why would you want to get yourself in trouble? However, if you do find something, your key stakeholders now may take the perspective that since you did identify something, what else is there? What else exists? Number 2 in the plan is accountability and responsibility. Who on your team is going to lead the charge? Who on your team is responsible for knowing what fraud looks like? In my opinion, everybody on the team needs regular training in terms of fraud awareness. Why? Because they are the eyes and ears of your organization. Number 3, establish an independent whistleblower program. A whistleblower program that is independent, and actually not just independent, but anonymous, is the number one way for your organization to find out if fraud is occurring internally. Why? It's demonstrated by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in a fraud survey that's done every 2 years that over 50% of frauds that are identified through a tip, and an anonymous tip or a hotline only increases the likelihood because the employee doesn't feel that there's going to be that backlash and that somebody can suddenly start pointing their finger at them. Number 4, identify a forensic accounting team, individual, trusted advisor that in the event a fraud occurs, you know that you can reach out and help and ask them for help. Why? When you do identify in your organization that there is something wrong, time becomes important. You want to deal with the situation immediately. You want to have it shut down. You want to deal with the media if you have to. You want to be able to say to your key stakeholders, don't worry, this does happen. We know it happens, but we know what we're doing because here's the work steps that we're going to follow. A lot of people don't want to know me, but when they need me, trust me, they want to know me. Meaning that even if you have to write down my name, David Malamed, and you want to contact me should something happen, call me. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to engage me, but it means that you've got a plan that we can speak it out and we can say, look, let's assess. Do we add value to you by having an independent investigation? Does this warrant investigation? Or should it be done externally? Number 5, the process needs to be defined. Who in the organization needs to be told? Number 1, not everybody. Number 2, only the small circle. Why? In the event that the allegations come back as not being true, then there is the situation of the person's reputation to continue operations and what can be done. Meaning that the less people that know internally, likely the better. Now, each of those steps can be elaborated, but really it is the idea of having a process in place and a policy in place that should somebody or should a group do something against that policy, that these are the procedures that you're going to take. Remember, this 5-step plan needs one other thing, and that's communication. You need to be able to communicate to your key stakeholders, your insurer, the leadership, what's going on, what you've done so far, what you've learned, and a timeline. Now, a timeline at the beginning is very difficult to be exact with. What I find really helps is going back to the key stakeholders with regular updates. We've done this so far, we're waiting for these documents, and we hope that in X amount of time, a week, 2 weeks, that we'll be able to close things off. Communication and transparency into the investigation for key stakeholders and leadership is vital for your success. No company is ever going to be able to protect themselves completely from fraud. What I can teach you, and in these next few videos what you're going to learn, is how to reduce the exposure, how to minimize the risk, and in the event of a fraud occurring, how to mitigate your loss. Being proactive about fraud reduces your exposure by 50%. Again, if I refer back to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, Report to the Nation, a fraud survey that's done every 2 years, it's clear that with preventative controls, such as training, such as whistleblower hotlines, that the risk is reduced in terms of time by 50%. And by reducing the time to identify the fraud is the number one way of minimizing your fraud exposure. Because if we go back to the idea of the average time that it takes to identify a fraud, it's about 16 months. And that's if you're lucky to identify it. Prevention costs 20 times less than an investigation, meaning for every dollar spent in prevention, that's $20 saved in investigation. One of the things that I'm seeing changing is that in today's world, organizations aren't scared to spend money on prevention. It used to be that spending money on preventative fraud controls was almost overlooked. And why? Nobody wanted to be the one who spent money on prevention. We want to spend money on growth. We want to spend money on reaction. And a lot of the time, my clients, when they call, they're reacting. Now they've got an issue. They want to be the hero who fixes the issue. In my mind, the true hero is the one who prevents it from happening, and if fraud does occur, knows how to deal with it. To uncover fraud, we can help set up your fraud policy. We can help do testing to see if your fraud controls work. We can help establish your fraud controls. We can help train your team. And in the event of a fraud, we can come in and help investigate it. Remember, the numbers tell the story. That's at least what I tell my kids. It's not a question of will we be exposed to fraud within our organization. It's a question of when we are exposed to fraud and we identify that it's occurring, do we know how we're going to handle it? Do we know what we're going to do to recover from it? Or are we lost? My name is Dave Malamed, and I want to help you. I'm your forensic accountant and fraud expert. Thanks for listening. To learn more about me and the services I provide, please go to uncoverfraud.com. Hopefully you enjoyed this video today. Please subscribe and become a member. Also, if you want to learn more about me and the services we provide, please visit uncoverfraud.com. Thank you.